Hello, everyone, and welcome to Net Zero Week, brought to you by YPO and iNetwork. I'm Dan Veazey from YPO, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar titled The Road to Net Zero, an Energy Perspective. The session will focus on how public sector organisations can reduce their carbon emissions and hit their net zero targets in the energy space. We will be looking at this from a gas, electricity, water, and a data point of view. I'm delighted to be joined today by our guest speakers. We have Vanessa Adams, Client Partner from Utilidex. We have Ben Young, Senior Account Manager from Corona Energy. We have Garrett Metcalf, Public Sector Manager from Empower. And we have Ollie Shelley, Head of Operations from Wave. Just a couple of housekeeping items to mention before we start. As you can see, there's a chat box on the side of your screen where you can submit any questions you might have to the panel, which we'll try and answer at the end of the session. Depending on how many questions that there are, we might not have time to answer them all, but we'll follow them up on an email after Net Zero Week. You can also use the menu on the top left of your screen to navigate back to the event agenda, where you can see all upcoming webinars. If you want to register for any more webinars, please follow the link at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to kick off today's session with a 10-minute introduction from each speaker. Vanessa, could I ask you to start us off, please?
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Again, I'm Vanessa. I'm the client partner at Utilidex. For those of you who may not know, Utilidex is a cloud-based platform with 3 integrated modules for bill validation and processing, energy and carbon management, and finally, flex procurement. What I do is look after our corporate, public sector, and industrial customers. I help with new business, and in particular with our frameworks like we have with YPO. This framework is a utilities framework for bill and invoice validation and energy management. This offering focuses on invoice validation, consumption monitoring, performance reporting, as well as industry compliance for our carbon reporting. In my role, I get to speak to our customers about their energy needs and how we can further assist them in other elements. And since I've started and began to sit in customer calls, each customer has a real focus on carbon net zero and their climate change initiatives. It's been amazing to hear and share that passion with our customers and understand further how Utilidex can support them. This week is all about procurement, so today my session will focus in on 3 things. Of course, helping you to better understand what sources of clean and renewable energy there are available to you, but also how to start lowering and optimizing your consumption so you only procure what's needed. Finally, I'll touch on how to best promote all the amazing work you're doing to procure renewable energy and lowering your consumption to the rest of your organization so everyone can play their part in the journey to a greener future. There are a few ways to procure renewable or greener energy. One way is buying 100% green energy from suppliers like Corona and Empower. I'm sure they'll touch on it in more detail later on, but about how they purchase their renewable energy. But most suppliers of renewable energy receive a REGO certificate or a Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin. This certificate states that a share of energy was produced by renewable energy. These REGO schemes provide transparency to consumers like us about the portion of electricity that suppliers source from renewable generation. To take a step further, you could also look to bring renewable energy to your sites such as solar and wind. With this option, you have 2 different ways to do so: behind the meter purchase agreement or in front of the meter purchase agreement. Behind the meter is essentially what you're probably all used to, which is physically having the generation on site, such as solar panels on the roof. You could own these panels or have it financed. A great example of this is one of our customers, Aviva, who run on 100% green energy and own one of the largest rooftop and solar car park solos in the UK. These panels generate over 812,000 kilowatt hours, which can produce energy and enough energy to power over 500 homes for 1 year. The other way is in front of the meter purchase agreement. This is essentially buying electricity directly from a wind farm or from the solar panel, although there are additional charges to behind the meter, such as distribution charges, especially if the generation is a distance away. This can be very attractive to people who don't have the space to bring generation on site due to the size or just unfitness of the building. All solutions have different considerations and benefits, as sourcing energy is not a one-size-fits-all. In particular, the agreements, as they are long-term solutions that require some capital and financial support. As you bring on renewable energy, whether sourcing from a supplier or straight from the generator, or taking the option to bring it on site, you should also look to ways to lower and optimize your consumption so you only procure and use what's needed. At Utiledex, we found there are a couple of steps that can really help you to understand how to do this. At first, it always starts with your data. It's important to have a view of your whole portfolio's energy data from your gas, power, water, and generation meters, and also key information about your site data, your meter data, tariff and rates, billing data, and even weather data. Having all this information lays the foundation for you to do further analysis. And with having all the right data in place and managed in a meaningful and presentable way, your teams can be empowered to understand what the sites are doing and can start to see what the issues are. And then once these issues are identified, you can then begin to analyze ways to lower and optimize your consumption. Finally, you can make the correct changes to not only improve your data quality and consumption, but also lower your costs and carbon emissions. Within the Energy Hub, which is our platform, we have different workflows for you to access all your energy data and can start to analyze that data. We also have put in place some powerful automation so you can ensure these savings are delivered. To help support these kind of different opportunities for your consumption, costs, and carbon, within the Energy Hub, we have over 30 reports ranging from your analytics data, from your energy management, consumption, data auditing, compliance, and much more. And you can all download these for further analysis. We also have Power BIs, which are visualizers that bring together all the data stored in the Energy Hub and also found within those reports. I'm going to go through 3 of these BIs now so you can start to have an idea of what you can see and how you're able to analyze things for your consumption, costs, and carbon. We're first going to look at our generation BI. This gives a graphical representation of all your connected assets from your solar and wind and how much each asset has generated compared to your consumption. With all of these different BIs, you can change the different filtering, whether that be the date range, the commodity or asset, and you can also choose different groups and the sites within those groups. So you can take a look at not only your whole portfolio, but begin to drill down on specific sites that may be performing well or poorly. Next, you'll see here our consumption analysis BI. This BI is showing you what your planned consumption was and how it compares to your actual consumption. You can track this at a monthly or weekly granularity and also picks up on your energy intensity. So you can start to understand your consumption per your site size or square footage. This BI also picks up on your site data, such as your open and close times. So you can start to track your vacant energy or out of hours consumption and start to spot those issues and outliers. Our last BI that I'll show is our consumption benchmark KPI. This BI helps you easily compare and track your yearly, monthly, weekly, and daily consumption and carbon emissions. So you can quickly and easily see your energy performance over time. And you can also see how much percentage of energy you saved and what that is in your actual annual carbon savings. Now that you've taken the amazing steps to not only procure greener energy, but also lower and optimize your consumption, it's important to share these milestones and progress with your organization and stakeholders and partners to ensure that everyone can play their part. Where traditionally organizations would highlight their sustainability initiatives in their annual reports with actions like we're planning to reduce X amount of carbon by 2030, with no real clear steps about what the organization is actually doing to achieve that initiative. We're now in the climate revolution with councils declaring climate emergencies all around the UK. So we must take the time to write down the steps and actions needed achieve net zero carbon and share with our stakeholders. So not only are they aware of what you're doing, but can start to see how they can play their part in the climate revolution. When speaking to our customers, although they all have different ways and different goals to achieve in different ways to achieve those goals, they all follow along with the same process to support their behavioral change within their organizations. The steps involved start with being aware of the need to change. And then it becomes the desire to actually make those changes. And with that desire, it becomes the need to know how to actually make the correct changes, and then implementing those changes within your organization. And then finally, it's about promoting and reinforcing those changes continuously within the organization. One customer of ours took this approach to behavioral change for their organization and was able to save annually 10 to 15% in carbon emissions. We want to support our customers and provide a platform for them to use as a foundation so they can achieve these savings as well. So following along with those kind of same model our customers took, we can start to look at dashboards that provide an overview of your consumption and even your carbon emissions. So you can easily begin to be aware of any problems or even your high consumptions and which sites need to adopt some of those changes. And although you might have an energy or a site managers whose job it is to understand these issues or problems, it's important to have a team to support you in these changes. We found gathering a green team or green champions is vital in organization's journey to carbon net zero. These teams can be formed from anyone within the organization, whether that be a line manager, a shop owner, or even a board member. Anyone who wants to be a part of the change. These green teams are vital in sharing best practices or improving a two-way communication between the team and the rest of your organization, making it easier to report on any issues, discuss solutions, and with unlimited user access, you can be sure that everyone has access to the energy and data that is important to them and the information that helps them reach their goals. And once you have your whole organization aware of your carbon goals and great teams formed to support those goals, it's important to keep them informed. And you can form in different ways, whether that be through easy to read dashboards, or maybe reports sent out about their site's performance, or even access to maybe some Power BIs or those Power Visualizers. Having this data and information readily available can really empower your teams to understand what their progress is and what they can continually do. And with using those reports and dashboards, you can then begin to help you make informed decisions outside of the system and within your organization. So going even back to that vacant energy BI I showed earlier, you can spot the sites which are, maybe using too much out of hours consumption. This may trigger you to go back to your employees and ask them to start shutting off lights, maybe unplugging some devices after working hours, to even maybe switching to LED light bulbs for better efficiency, or maybe for light sensors to switch off when no one is in the room. Or you can even further go on and look at maybe better insulation so you can lose less heat and save on energy costs. There are many other ways to make the right changes for your organization, which can be low cost or require some capital. Again, these solutions are not a one-size-fits-all, and it requires your green teams and your whole organization's input to decide the best course of action. And then finally, it's all about reinforcing change. There are many ways to reinforce that within your organization, but what's important is to consistently and frequently send information out to everyone to keep them informed and support the reinforcement. You can do this through weekly or monthly meetings, through bulletin boards and reports. You can see here in the Energy Hub, we have a dashboard that has your overall site's performance and even a leaderboard that can help you have a little competition between your different sites so they can continuously try to do better each week to reach their carbon reduction goals. And final, just want to say thank you, YPO, for having me, and thank you all for listening. I hope you all found this information useful, and if you would like to know more information about Utilidex or the framework, please look under the YPO's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that presentation. Just a reminder to the audience that we'll be taking questions after all the presentations are done. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ben Young at Corona Energy, who'll run through his presentation from a gas perspective. Thank you.
Hi everyone. As Dan, thank you, Dan. Hi everyone. I'm Ben Young from Corona Energy, and we are the current supplier of gas on YPO's framework. The main overarching topic that I'm going to be discussing today is the question of how do you decarbonise a gas supply? Well, with well over half of the councils in the UK having already declared climate emergencies, as was being said before, and 80% of them actually having committed to being net zero way ahead of the governmental target by 2030 instead, it can seem like a really difficult question to answer. Because as we know, in the absence of a cleaner alternative, no one is going to be physically stopping burning natural gas anytime soon. Trials are being made in general with the likes of hydrogen. However, even if such a decision is made to make a switch like that, we would be a long way off from physically implementing changes to what is currently the habit of a lifetime. So as a result, being efficient with the unavoidable current usage is always going to be a good place to start. Arguably the easiest way to have the quickest and most direct impact is to look at demand reduction and optimization by utilising options such as looking at your half-hourly data, working with facilities managers to come up with low energy solutions like LED lighting, having partnerships with third-party consultants to help identify exactly where in the organisation changes are required before taking actions, because it's not necessarily just energy. The aspect of decarbonisation has a big reliance on behavioural change, again, as was being said before, and requires everyone to get involved and on board. Some of our customers utilise the AMR units that we install on their supplies to obtain and track how their gas is being used on a more granular basis. So I've pulled out some examples to show you what that looks like. And as you can see in this first customer example here, so this is some live data from March 2021. As you can see from this example, I've taken this data to show two sites that are used for very similar purposes, and they're shown to have very similar trends in daily consumption when you look at them over the course of a month. As you can see, they tend to have most of their usage through the week, and then are much switched down on the weekends, with the main difference being that one site is clearly much bigger and uses way more gas than the other. This graph shows the customers, that same customer, but it shows their whole portfolio over the month, at each time point over a 24-hour period over an entire month, to show how much gas is used at each point, with the average historic usage being shown alongside in blue. As you can see in this example, the customer does tend to use during the day, like most days, but between the last few years and this year now, you can see that they are now using far more than they used to. The customer whose data this belongs to uses this function to monitor the performance of their portfolio so that any abnormalities are picked up as soon as possible. Now, the graph shown here may well identify an abnormality in the sense of why are they using so much more gas, or it could well just be that that customer has intentionally turned up their gas for another reason. Maybe they've extended a particular site or whatever the case may be. But the point being that they can use this so that they can identify issues and fix them quickly. And depending on how you run your gas supplies, something like this may be beneficial for you, so as to assist in identifying where changes and reductions are able to be made. A question I get asked quite a lot about is green gas, and what is it available, etc., or what's sometimes referred to as renewable gas. Green gas is a way of reducing your carbon emissions. Unfortunately, however, over the last few years, it has grown a lot more scarce and therefore higher in price as a result of much higher demand, without a great deal of increased supply. Ironically, due to largely due to the fact that so many councils and private organisations have declared what they're going to do in terms of reducing their emissions over the next few decades, and therefore the demand for it's been much higher. Furthermore to that, it's actually much harder to generate than renewable electricity, so it's a lot less common in energy tariffs. So green gas, or what's often referred to as biomethane, is produced synthetically from food waste, landfill, and other sources. It's then processed, where they add things like the smell, and then it's just injected into the grid. Something that some people might not know is that green gas comes through the pipes with regular gas. It's injected and it just becomes diluted into the one big network. The way that it works is that the Green Gas Certification Scheme, or the GGCS, tracks this gas throughout the UK. They track how much is injected, and then they will issue certificates to users based on the fuel classification of the feedstocks used to create the gas itself. And when someone buys green gas from a supplier, although nothing physically different happens in terms of what's coming through their pipes, and what they're actually paying for is to put their name against a certain volume of green gas being injected into the grid and receiving an RGGO certificate to state as such, therefore rendering the user being able to say that they're using X amount of green gas. Considering the number of councils across the country with these targets, within YPO and otherwise, and the number of large companies with the same pathways, and not to mention people in their homes, there are so many people who want this, but again, at the moment, the supply simply cannot keep up with the demand. As a result, the government has mandated the introduction of a green gas levy to be applied to all gas bills from October 2021. This green gas levy will be a fund that provides a kickback to green gas generators as an incentive for the funding of projects to make more green gas available across the country, and it's going to be paid for users via their gas bills. So although it's not going, in the immediate term, it's going to cause a small change to, well, hopefully a small change to gas bills come October 2021. Hopefully in the long term, it will mean more green gas availability across the country. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is that there isn't a whole lot of green gas. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is carbon offsetting. As there isn't a whole lot of green gas to go around, and given how expensive it is, companies and councils are exploring alternative avenues such as carbon offsetting, a term you might have heard being used more and more often over the last few years. Carbon offsetting is similar to the green gas scheme in that it does not actually change what your output is from a carbon perspective, but rather paying for carbon offsetting is paying towards the funding of various projects that are working towards the reduction of carbon outputs elsewhere via other means, therefore offsetting the volumes that you are producing by, say, burning gas. Carbon can be offset through all sorts of projects worldwide, through programs of, say, renewable investments, reforestation, clean cooking, and loads more, and they're tracked and independently verified by an organisation called Verra. Organisations across the country are committing to total net zero targets and are doing this by partnering with globally recognised schemes and investing in things such as planting of trees and protection against deforestation. Where green gas is UK specific, carbon offsetting is typically global and therefore typically cheaper than green gas as it stands at the moment, and can vary depending on the type, location, and the size of the project that's been invested in. Corona have started getting into the area of carbon offsetting, and customers who take this as a product are able to neutralise the carbon emissions associated with their gas consumption through carbon offset certificates. So again, it works in much the same way as green gas does. This can then be combined with the undertaking of green gas if required to enable a climate neutral energy claim, or alternatively it can be done standalone. By investing in carbon offsetting, you also receive things like project information and updates as things progress, so you can track how things are going and use them to communicate internally as well, if that's something you choose. That's everything from me. So I just want to thank you thank you to YPO for having me, and thank you to everyone who is here to hear me today. And please do let me know if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for that presentation. It was very insightful. I'll now hand over to Gareth Metcalf, who works for Empower Business Solutions, and he'll run through the kind of net zero from an energy perspective, electricity perspective, sorry.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here and playing a part in Net Zero Week. As Dan introduced me, Gareth Metcalf, I'm the Public Sector Manager for Empower Business Solutions. We are the electricity framework provider for YPO. and I'm here today to talk to you about net zero. I would start my presentation off by saying that it's probably the single biggest item of conversation with customers, and quite rightly so, as I feel it's exactly the type of conversation we should be having at the moment, and I feel it's going to only develop as a subject over the next decade as we move towards the first set of targets. So, as most people will know, we have a UK-wide target with some regional variations in there, but as a UK government setting an emissions target of 2050. However, a number of people, organisations listening to this call today will have already set their own net zero targets. Example here, NHS England working towards 2030. A lot of the organisations that I talk to and deal with have 2030 as an aligned target. And let's be honest, that's within this next decade. So there is work to be done. Good news is some of that work has clearly already started. Emissions have started to come down. The change in generation mix that we've seen within the UK over the last 10 to 15 years has started to drive that. I'm sure we've got organisations on the call who already are taking REGO back power. It was mentioned on earlier presentation, and that is certainly one of the early steps towards the net zero strategy and goal. However, what I want to cover today are some of the challenges and opportunities around net zero. An example from NPower working within the public sector, which may be of interest, and I guess just some key call outs to finish off with in terms of points to note. So, good to know there is definitely a strong commitment around net zero. We've seen 502 UK organisations feel that they can commit to the 2030, halving their reduction by halving their impact by 2030. We've got a lucky 8% claiming that they've already reached the milestone. And then to hone in on the public sector, NPower commissioned some work during the course of 2020, which found that 83% of public sector organisations believe that 2050 is a realistic target, and over half of them already having a clear target in place of how they're going to deliver that themselves. So what can net zero actually deliver for you as an organisation? What can you gain from putting a pathway in place and working towards that? So the first item there is budget support. Of course, one of the key aims here is reducing cost and reducing energy usage, which obviously there is a link between the two. Also, I believe that once you start to look at the projects and the pieces of work that will deliver your net zero target, you will see process improvements. So again, opportunities to reduce costs, become more efficient. Important to note as well, though, net zero can also be a revenue opportunity. I will touch on this later when I talk through a specific example, but there are revenue streams to be gained, for example, through demand-side response schemes, which can be linked to large-scale battery projects, etc., etc. So it's not just savings; there are revenue opportunities as well. Sustainability, making your organisation fitter and leaner for the future, not just from an energy perspective, but all round. Also talking there about contributions to local community from a health perspective. Here in the West Midlands, where I'm based, we've got a clear air zone in place now in central Birmingham. Again, all designed to improve quality of life and improve the local environment. The reputational benefits, I think, are important to call out, particularly as we start to see, and we're already seeing, collaboration between public and private sector. I'm personally already starting to see, like-minded organisations wanting to work with like-minded organisations, those that are clearly have a path in place and are serious about meeting their net zero goals. In terms of security and resilience, I remember National Grid calling out 3 or 4 years back that it was important that organisations, where they can, start to look at being having elements of self-sufficient in place around the grid and supply. Obviously not achievable by all organisations, but those that have the opportunity to build demand export capability and take the reliance off the grid is something that should be considered in that overall piece. Final point on this, but obviously very important, is the funding itself, because a number of these projects are going to require investment. We've obviously had two pretty competitive rounds of SAILEX funding of late, but again, are there other opportunities working with partners who could provide funded options around delivery of specific projects? But clearly, CapEx is going to be needed and investment is going to be needed to deliver the bigger projects. What are the challenges? So, if we look at a plan out to 2030, 2042, what are the challenges that you should be aware of as you go into building that? Now, some of you on the call are already in that process and thinking about it. But for those that aren't, here's some key tips that could well be useful. So the first one, again, and this is consistent with what's been called out on the earlier presentations, is about knowing the baseline, getting your data right, knowing your starting point. Let's be honest, there'll be in some local areas that there'll be projects in place already that are contributing towards that net zero goal. How do you measure that? At a basic level, making sure that you're, from an electricity perspective, making sure that you've got good energy data. Your meters you've got the right metering in place. But again, then you've got the right software to be able to interrogate that and get the right view. So baseline of data, really important. Then we move on to the targets. So not only the end target, but what are the interim steps to get there? And we talk there about the organisation's vision and objectives. This is obviously not for me, this is not a plan that's going to be delivered by an energy team or by a procurement team. It's by the whole organisation working together and getting buy-in across a local authority or private sector organisation to make sure that everybody is working to deliver that net zero goal. Aligned to that, in terms of the cell of the vision and objectives, is being able to identify the benefits. I touched on the previous slide, but being able to call out at different stages where the benefits for net zero are. Could be an improvement to a process, reduction in energy usage, but important you can signpost those and call them out as you move forward. Technologies and projects. Technology is changing at a fast pace, and when you look at some of the building blocks towards net zero, be it EV, electric vehicle charging, solar, that battery storage, that technology is changing at a pace. So it's important that you're aware of that and are bringing the right projects in place at the right time with the right people around you. I've mentioned funding. Again, strong business case. Making sure, again, you've got support to build the business case. I will touch on that in a moment with a case study that we were particularly involved in. But making sure that business case is robust, points to the benefit, points to the reason why the funding and the investment is required. And then that final step, but a step that you'll be coming back to time and time again, is just making sure that you're proving the case of what you've put in place is delivered. This could be at a small scale, but ultimately you're working towards to be able to prove that you've met that 2030 target or that 2042 target, whatever it may be. Try to illustrate this. I suppose trying to capture here that it's an iterative process, but from our perspective, energy intelligence, building the data, consulting with the right organisations, both internally and externally. Project design, really important. The projects have got to be linked to funding, and ultimately all knit together by excellent project management across the piece. Having the right people empowered and enthused to be leading this through the organisation. The final piece there around measurement and optimization, again, that's something you'll come back to time and time again, being able to constantly review where you've got to, the progress, and what you've developed, and the reporting around that. Really important. So I said I'd sort of try and illustrate it, bring it to life a little bit more for you. So here's a case study of one here at NPower that we're proud of. It's local authority, so West Sussex County Council, and we supported them from a very early stage with a development of a solar array linked to a battery optimization strategy. It was the UK's first subsidy-free solar farm. The asterisk there is to say that's in the public sector. And again, this was a piece of the jigsaw for West Sussex in building towards their net zero target. So this was designed to support their reducing their emission reduction target, as well as over their overall energy costs. So our work we work really closely with everybody involved in the solar array and the battery to say, look, this is how we best optimize this site for you. This is how we'll best run it for you. And again, just coming back to my earlier point, not just around cost avoidance, but also about delivering value. So actually creating a revenue stream, which I guess is, can be helpful for conversations internally, particularly with finance and senior management. This is not just about trying to avoid costs. This can be about building potential revenue opportunities as well. So what did we do with West Sussex? Well, we built a flexible power purchase agreement for the export power. We then committed contractually to manage that battery 24/7. So with the current regime, prior to targeted charging review, being able to manage it through the triad process, and participation in National Grid's balancing services, really important. Now it's fair to shout out that this is an evolving piece. National Grid are constantly looking at the types of services that they need to balance the system, but we felt we were best placed to do that. And then again, linking into capacity market, again, this is through the development of energy policy, the new charges coming in. There's an opportunity here to benefit from it and manage it. And then, just looking at the price sensitivity and being best placed to be able to deploy that battery at different times to deliver best value for our clients on this case. And just to illustrate one of the things we're proud about there with West Sussex, we achieved the highest accepted tender price for dynamic fast frequency response, £60.42 a megawatt hour. And again, that was just to be able to, that fed back into their revenue stream in that business case. Really important. I'm not going to read it out, but there's a nice quote there from Dara at the end, Dara Casey, who was driving this from West Sussex point of view. So that's the art of the possible. Absolutely for me, but again, this is an element, a building block. There are lots of pieces that go around that, but I always think a nice illustrative example to show. But just to finish off for myself, some takeaway messages. I think key is that you create a joined up strategy that plots a clear path to net zero, really knitting the organisation around you. Data is so key. It's a fundamental and a real starting point to be able to get that baseline right and then build on it. Ensure projects aren't dealt with in isolation. We see a lot of tenders for EV, absolutely the right thing to do, but how does that EV strategy link into net zero, making sure that it's built into that bigger picture. In line with that, the business case needs to be strong and well thought through and well put together. And I mentioned technology and innovation changing at a pace. Make sure you've got the right experts around you to support you on that journey and to give you the advice. And my advice would be to pick the partners who are going to maximise those benefits, those partners who can work with you across a framework to link it together and knit your net strategy and net zero strategy into one place. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. Look forward to any questions you may have. Potentially look forward to talking to you in the future, some of you in the future, about your net zero plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth, for that presentation and insight. Just a reminder that the Q&A session will be held after all presentations are done by our speakers. We now move on to our final speaker and presentation from Ollie Shelley at Wave, who will give you kind of a net zero perspective from a water point of view. Thank you.
Hi there, Dan. Thank you very much for that introduction. As you said, my name is Ollie Shelley. I'm Head of Operations for Wave Utilities. And we're a retailer that works in the non-household competitive water market. And I suppose head of operations a bit vague. I head up our water efficiency services department. So that's my role here today. And pleased here to talk to you today about the links between water, energy and carbon. So really, pleased to be able to talk to you about the links between water, energy and carbon. So it's already the bit where the boy who's grown up in water is a bit nervous talking at an event predominantly around energy and carbon. And even more nervous when you follow three really excellent presentations and presenters like that. But let's see how we go. So, as I said, the road to net zero, talking to you about how saving water can contribute to cutting your costs and your emissions. So, the start point really, I suppose, is about what is the carbon impact of the water industry. Now, a few years ago now, the Environment Agency did a report, and they actually calculated that the water industry itself contributed around 1% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite a staggering amount, really, considering that's primarily the water companies themselves, what they contribute from their operations and activities. But why is that? I guess I've grown up in that industry. My background is operations in water and wastewater. And so I guess to me it's fairly obvious, but to share it with you guys, the abstraction, treating and delivering water to your tap is incredibly energy intensive process. Okay. Abstraction's really just a byword for pumping. We have to take that water from rivers, boreholes, reservoirs, and pump it to a water treatment works. Once it's there, it'll initially go through some kind of physical screens and strainers, but they're not static pieces of equipment, which you may not see. You don't have just a giant net or things you pass it through. There'll be screens and strainers that move, and they're motorized, so that's a piece of energy. Then you'll move into other processes like flocculation and coagulation. Just testing my ability to say those after a bad night's sleep. And again, basically that's about dosing chemicals into the water to make particles stick together to make them easier to screen out later on. But that process requires mixers for a start, so you can't just put chemical in. You actually have to have powered mixers to churn that water and put it all together. Then you'll move on to some kind of filtration process, some basic, some more complicated, involving things like granular activated carbon. But either way, you need blowers as part of that process when you do it, and there'll be a degree of things like backwashing and stuff, which requires pumps from time to time. If you've got surface water treatment works, a lot of them will disinfect with ozone. I won't get too much into the production of ozone, but it is one of those things you have to produce on site with an ozone generator. And again, massively energy intensive. Really good way of disinfecting water, kills pretty much anything ozone, but very energy intensive to create. And really, even dosing chlorine at the end requires a degree of energy in the control pumping of dosing of that chemical. And at every stage of that on a water treatment works, as much as you're trying to use gravity to your advantage to flow that water through the works, there'll be lots of lift pumps to bring that water back up to a height to then let it gravitate down. Okay. And finally, you then got to pump it out into the network and get it, miles and miles from the water treatment works to someone's tap and into their home or their business. And it doesn't stop there. With your wastewater being taken away, again, it'll get discharged into the sewer. We'll try to use gravity, and in some parts of the country, you'll be really topographically blessed, probably like Yorkshire, to be fair, where you can use hills and gravity to your advantage in laying a sewer. Or you can live where I do in the Fens in Peterborough, where it's really flat, and we have thousands of pumping stations that all require energy just to move that sewage back to a wastewater treatment works. When it's there, kind of similar sort of processes again. You've got screens and bits to remove out some of what we politely call solids, I guess, from everything, which requires power. Even settlement tanks, which is what you can see on screen there, they've got an arm there to take a layer of sludge off the top. It's a particularly clean looking settlement tank, to be fair. That's powered and going round. Even basic trickling filters and things like that will use power to turn the arms on them. And more complicated activated sludge processes use blowers and a huge amount of energy to treat, right the way to the back end that actually your sludge treatment processes will use a lot of energy. So just the actual processes involved in treating that water to deliver it to your home or business, take it away and discharge it back to the environment is really energy intensive. On top of that, the wholesale water companies are also running, cars, vans, tankers, jetters, huge fleets of vehicles to get people around to maintain all this. And all of that contributes to that high carbon and greenhouse gas kind of figure. But that's not the end of it. Actually, when that water's in your home or your business, you're not just using it cold out of the tap most of the time. You'll be processing it in some way, whether that's heating, chilling, pumping it, moving it around different places, freezing it into umpteen different industrial processes. You're going to use that water and there's going to be energy associated with that process. So what does that do to that percentage? Well, actually, that same report says if you just take into account the domestic side processing of that water, predominantly, which is going to be heating and hot water, obviously, that's going to raise the carbon impact of the industry and water as a whole in the UK from 1% of the greenhouse gases in the country to 6%, which is a huge uplift. So really, actually, about 85% of the carbon impact of water in the country has nothing to do with the actual wholesale water companies. It has everything to do with what we are as end users are doing with it. So there's a strong link there. Even more interesting, that 6% is probably higher still because it does not contain anything to do with non-domestic market at all. So that's just the estimation of domestic premises, has absolutely nothing to do with anything else that's being done on in the non-domestic space, any processing in an industry. And that's really, that industrial non-domestic market makes up about a third of the consumption in the UK. So really that figure's probably getting up to close to 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions, maybe more if you're including that. And that'll be an interesting piece of research I think the industry needs to get on and do, although it's a lot more difficult than doing it in the homes. But I guess trying to focus on what some of those impacts might be in the non-domestic space, because me saying it hasn't been worked out isn't a lot of help to you guys. A few years ago, some engineers that were working for us here at Wave did some base principle calculations of what the carbon impact associated with doing different kind of industrial processes and non-domestic stuff with water might be. So, and you can assume when we say 1 cube of cold water, by the way, that's the carbon impact of delivering it and taking it away and treating it. So 1.15 kg CO2e just for cold water, raising to 15 for heated water. And you start to see some really big numbers if you're producing steam with that at atmospheric pressure, or getting it to 8 bar, or chilling it. So those figures, like all of these things, are based on kind of averages and base principles. So depending on what technology and bits you're running or businesses are running, that'll be slightly different, but gives you an order of magnitude idea of how much of the carbon impact is not just coming from the water that arrives at the tap, but actually what you're starting to do with it. And hopefully that really does build up kind of a clear picture for you that by saving water, you are going to lower your carbon emissions and you are going to reduce your energy consumption. So there's a huge benefit there, and probably one that's going kind of unclaimed, I'd imagine, in your organisations right now. I guess as a final point for me, really, though, is having spoke about those numbers, and I think the industry is evolving its understanding of that, is the importance of action. Net zero targets and any target around kind of environmental benefit or anything you've done is to drive an activity. So I think measurement and verification is incredibly important, but it is right to put it into the right proportion, because obviously we don't want greenwash. We don't want people making up numbers and doing bits. But there is a degree when you're dealing with lower value services, particularly water. I'll put my tiny violin away about being low value next to energy. But, I think if you look at some of the protocols around this and IPMVP stuff, you shouldn't be spending more than 10% of a project cost and trying to prove what that is. And I do think that's an important rationale to keep in the back of our minds, which is we may have to use some of these broader brush association assumptions around carbon cost in the industry and water to be able to claim that benefit. But that's okay, because going back and proving it to the nth degree detail would undo the good work we've done. And that's an established kind of principle in engineering and something that I could talk about for a long period of time, and I won't today. So it's just a plea to say to people, it's great to understand this. I'm happy to talk to anyone and share any sort of information from today. But, the idea is it should be turning people on to taking action, not putting them off because they worry about where stuff is. That's my final kind of plea. What I would say in the market is trying to catch up onto this. I sit on some market kind of improvement groups, and one of the interesting bits of work going along, because we're aware in the industry that the net carbon is such an important issue. Most of the market operator and look after the market data sets are looking at how they can augment those data sets and add carbon costs and figures to be kept in the market. So any retailer you work with will have access and be able to express what the carbon cost of your energy is, not just retailers like Wave who have gone to the effort to kind of working that out. So that's kind of all from me. And I guess that was my final thought, is saying, definitely, hopefully you've been able to see there that, by targeting your water consumption, you're going to make savings on your carbon and your energy bills. So I'll hand back to Dan now, and really look forward to hearing any questions that any people have. So thank you.
Thanks, Ollie, for that presentation. So that concludes all our presentations for this session. I found it very interesting, as I'm sure all the audience did. It's good to know that our framework providers providing this valuable insight into kind of net zero and how we can support that. Like has been mentioned, many local authorities and public sector organisations have got kind of strict targets in place, a lot of net zero by 2030 for kind of their individual estates. Some have got targets for their whole kind of borough and council area. So yeah, thank you very much for all the insight from the presenters. We'll now start to move on to the Q&A session. Welcome to this live Q&A session. Please keep your questions coming in. We've had a few in already, so please keep your questions coming in. We've got around about 20-25 minutes to kind of have a discussion and answer a lot of questions. So the first question we've had in is around hydrogen. So could you please you've done some testing going on in the north of England using existing gas infrastructure. How is this going on? So I just want to put that one over to you, Ben, first from Corona Energy.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the questions you've sent through. In terms of hydrogen, it's quite an ambitious feat, but by all accounts, it's not impossible. So a lot of people might have heard that there is some testing going on with the potential for hydrogen to potentially replace natural gas as a heat source in the future, and a fuel source as well, I suppose. So far, there has indeed been some testing within small areas of existing infrastructure with I think it was a 20% hydrogen blend. And from the results, there wasn't a great difference reported by actual users of the gas. That sort of testing is really necessary before it's even considered as a complete alternative, because, well, they need to examine the long-term effects of hydrogen at different blends on different types of pipeline materials, pressures, etc., like assessing safety and costs. So there is a project planned by National Grid called Future Grid, that's what you're referring to, Dan, in terms of what they're looking to build in Cumbria. Like, it's a hydrogen testing facility up there for that sort of thing, with aim to start construction this year, with testing beginning next year. So it's going, it's just going slowly, that's all, as understandably.
And just to follow up on that, Ben, obviously Corona Energy are predominantly a gas supplier. So are Corona Energy looking at investing in hydrogen and hydrogen infrastructure in the UK?
Well, from a Corona perspective, although there hasn't been a great deal of movement like in that area yet, in the grand scheme of like actually getting to use it, we are monitoring its development, and as a group, our parent company is well invested in the rollout of renewable technologies, which we can and want to make available to our customers. So meaning that if that's the way the world's moving, then we'll sure as likely be moving with it.
No, that's great. Thank you, Ben. In terms of kind of renewables, while we're on that kind of subject, obviously a lot of councils kind of look down the solar route because there's land that's available to build kind of solar farms. So can I just kind of get the panel's views on solar technologies and what their thoughts are on that? So I'll start with you, Gareth, on that one.
Yes, thanks, Dan. I think it's a really important element of that strategy. So I can speak personally. Seen a couple of examples of projects go all the way through from field to delivery. So I certainly, from an E.ON Group perspective, we see solar as being a really important contributor to that path towards net zero. It is about getting the right partners in. Looking at the right funding strategy, and I think the other benefit for solar, which is really important, looking at co-locating a battery on there as well. So it brings other technologies to the fore, and that battery can start to be a revenue stream for an organisation as well. And we've seen some good examples of that. So a big tick in the box, certainly from an E.ON Group NPower perspective for me.
Yeah, and I think someone's just raised the point that using a roof as well as land. But I think that's a very important point, Gareth, about kind of using a battery, because we know that solar is one of the kind of generations that is very peaky, particularly in the north of England where the sun radiance isn't quite as high as kind of in the south of England. There is some form of kind of it's intermittent, like a lot of renewable technology.
Yeah, which is why it needs to be a balance. I was going to say, Dan, why it needs to be a balance within other projects and other other pieces of the jigsaw to get you towards that journey. But it's certainly complementary and one that we feel organisations should be considering.
Yeah. And I just want to bring in Vanessa in now from a kind of data perspective, and how do you kind of treat solar data within your kind of platform?
Yeah, so we basically, I'm not coming from a very technical standpoint, but it is almost similar to how we treat, gas and power data. So so with gas and power data, you're getting that metering data from the supplier. Within our system, we set up kind of different connections, whether that be through an email connection or through like a protocol called FTP or SFTP, and we pull that meter data into the system. So we kind of take that same process with collecting solar data. So we're receiving that generation data, and you'll be able to connect that kind of generation again within the system. So as I showed throughout my presentation, kind of like that with that generation BI, so you can see how much generation you're actually using within that, and compare that against like your actual consumption, so you can see kind of a whole view. And I think it's really important to see a whole view of what you're actually consuming, whether that be your gas, power, and water, and what you're actually generating, and being able to see that difference and how much you've kind of saved in your carbon savings as well too. But it's pretty similar, like I said, it's pretty similar to receiving solar data as we do to receive other kind of meter data as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very key point as well around data. It's obviously if you can get the data, you can record it, analyze it. It's a good way to start with anything to do with a net zero project or looking at kind of carbon net zero.
Yeah.
But just out of interest, from your company's point of view, this is everyone on the panel. What sort of technologies have you invested in, or have you got any kind of solar on any of your buildings or assets, or own any kind of assets from a renewable point of view?
Yeah, so we work out of Level 39, which is a pretty innovative, I would say, not startup, but it's a floor full of all fintech people, basically, on our floor. It's in Canary Wharf in One Canada Square. And just with all the other kind of companies that work on our level, that you can maybe see some people walking behind me. We have some people working in kind of smart building technologies. So they look at kind of how I mentioned earlier, with turning off certain, understanding the vacant energy in the building and knowing when kind of the cleaners are in the building, when some employees have left. So there's kind of different technologies I know with on our floor. And then working with our company as well. So we are a very virtual company. So we have some people working up north. We have some people working in London. So we are looking at kind of ways of how we're able to track within our organization. But we're just looking at that technology and waiting for that technology to come around to see what the best way is when we're working virtually.
Anyone else on the panel got anything to add on that? Ollie, can I bring you in?
Yeah. Just I suppose not necessarily Wave because we're a retailer, so we have two relatively small offices, so we don't make a huge amount of impact. But I guess in the wider industry, from that background, the wholesale water companies doing quite a lot of this space. So I think picking up on some of the questions, talking about seeing, areas of land and bits as opportunities and assets being underused for generating energy. Quite a lot of water companies starting to use reservoirs to float solar panels on, because and actually quite effective because you've got a large open space there. It's not really being used for anything else, and the sun tends to shine on it all the time, so you don't have where it's facing and all these sort of issues. Really, you've got a large sort of space and body of water out in the open, which is great. As well as other bits that we've done in the industry over the years, such as generating energy actually from human waste, from sewage treatment works, which is a lovely kind of topic to go into. But basically, you can digest that, and get much more kind of gas and bits and put it through a CHP engine. And actually, to big shout out to Scottish Water, I know they've done quite a lot of work with using hydropower and various renewable sources. And I believe the last time we spoke to them, they do something like 200% of their own power demand from renewable sources now. Just from realising, look, we've got a lot of reservoirs, we've got a lot of stored water, we can do a lot of solar, we can do a lot of hydropower. So definitely across the water industry as a whole, huge amount kind of going into that space.
That's great. Thanks for that, Ollie. Gareth, anything else to add on that?
Yeah. We felt it was important to I suppose put our money where our mouth is early doors. So a lot of our NPower estate is solar PV'd up, battery storage, innovative lighting. Yeah, we felt it was important, particularly bringing, in days pre-COVID with customers visiting and be able to talk to them and showcase, what we're doing. We felt that was an important message to put out there. So yeah, it's we've certainly gone down that route.
No, thanks, Gareth. Ben, have you got anything to add on that point? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Ben.
I keep forgetting to put myself back off it. Yeah, absolutely. Like, our offices are much the same. Like they're relatively new, and we moved into them a few years ago and chose them specifically for one of the reasons we specifically chose them was because of the smart technologies and stuff that was involved, and the kind of things that are on site that help us run at a net zero basis. So.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Ben. We have had a question come through about batteries, so I'll just move on to that one. Is there any information on the battery situation where the efficiency is still relatively low? Given the issue that volume of batteries needed to store the energy then becomes a fire issue depending on where they can be housed in facilities. I don't know if you have a comment on that, Gareth, from an electricity supplier point of view.
Only that health and safety is extremely important and paramount. So any battery storage scheme would need to be absolutely adequately tested in terms of storage and support and optimization and etc. So yeah, that's all part of the planning. The planning of the size of the battery, the storage of it, the maintenance of it is absolutely critical, Dan. That's the main call out I would suggest from my perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult in this space with new technologies coming to the market all the time, and there is certain risks associated with new technology. I know.
Yeah.
Well, solar, for instance, has been around for years, but it's kind of like anything new. There's always going to be a risk, particularly when it's kind of from an energy point of view, because there is that fire risk element there.
There's some well-established examples now of this working really well and in a safe manner. As you say, technology will move on, and new entrants will come in and things will continue at a pace that they are at a pace at the moment anyway. But yeah, happy to take anything offline if anybody wants to get in touch on any specifics around that.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Gareth. We've got a question about data and portal. So is there a website portal where you can log on to for accessing your hour-by-hour data for gas? I'll put that one to you, Ben, first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so there are, in the grand scheme of there are many websites, but we in particular we offer a data service through our portal with Corona Energy that allows users to view their half-hourly data and in any kind of granularity they want. To be honest with you, so probably drilling it down further than all the way down to half-hourly, all the way up to monthly, to look at trends and comparisons and things like that as well.
No, thanks, Ben. And Vanessa, do you want to just add something from a kind of system developer point of view in terms of data management?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, just within our system, so looking at kind of gas and power, we have a heat map that allows you to view kind of what you're expecting in reads and what the system picks up as it has that connection with that half-hourly meter. So that data that can be picked up basically kind of shows in a heat map, and this can be downloaded into a report for you. You can also send that out to the lovely suppliers, and they can fill in and send any kind of gaps or any of that kind of missing historical data, which is really great. And we're also being able to collect some of that non-half-hourly data as well too, so that non-interval data. So you're able to view that in kind of a daily view, and that can flow into some consumption reports that we have within the system as well too.
No, thanks, Vanessa. I suppose, yeah, from my point of view, it's like at the moment, obviously you've got your half-hour electricity supplies, but there's still some profile classes that are still non-half-hourly. A lot of gas supplies they're not mandated to have kind of AMR technology put on them. You think the market's going to have to shift so that everyone is mandated from a gas and electricity point of view to actually have half-hourly data or regular data to support this kind of net zero kind of solution? Gareth, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think I called out in my presentation that the starting point for that journey is data quality and knowing your baseline. There are already moves afoot around mandation. I'm speaking now from an electricity point of view around those lower profile classes moving towards half-hourly settlement. So yeah, absolutely critical, Dan, at the start of the journey to understand your data and understand, I suppose, the size of the challenge you've got in front of you.
And Ollie, just bring you in here from a water point of view. Obviously, historically, AMR and water, it's kind of not as popular take-up as maybe it is on gas and electricity. So you've got any views on kind of where kind of recording data and consumption from a water point of view is going?
Yeah, sure. As you alluded to, I guess AMR take up in water relatively low. I guess mainly because customers have to invest in that, and the reality is the cost of water is a lot lower than gas, relatively speaking. But I'll put my tiny violin away about that. But the reality is the cost of the technology, I guess, involved in logging or putting the technology on that meter is not massively cheaper on water than it is on, say, gas. In fact, it's pretty much the same. In terms of where it's going, I guess there's some wholesalers that are looking at smart meter rollouts and what that means as to where they go and trying to get people to hourly data, which is great. I do think that's a bit like going from the ridiculous to the sublime, because you've got some customers who are struggling to get 2 meter reads a year, but we're suddenly worrying about how we get them hourly data, and maybe just a monthly regular read would be a good interim step, I think, along that route. Mosul, who are the market operator in the non-domestic market, are just about doing a strategic metering review, and I think that's going to help set the direction over the next kind of 5 years in terms of, particularly for the non-domestic market, what wholesalers should be doing, what retailers should be doing, and what customers should be doing for themselves, which I think will at least make that quite clear. So hopefully that answers that question for you, Dan.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ollie. We have had a question actually around saving water. They've put saving water is of huge importance, and there is not enough communication about it. People take it for granted. Is there going to be any change, more communication about saving water? So best to start with you, Ollie, on that one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess, I would agree, and I think there probably does need to be more communication. I guess controversially, I'm going to say I don't think the route into the future is to do it on its own. I think events like this and not linking water to carbon, but actually, I think COVID's probably taught us all one thing, which is if you try to out doomsday all the time and sit here and go, well, actually, the energy crisis is worse than the water one, you run the risk of something else coming in and trumping you and being more immediate. So I think thinking more along the lines of, right, actually, we've got an environmental emergency and we need to start thinking about energy, carbon, water, resources as one thing that we want to bring down is probably the way forward. So I would agree, but I don't think it's right to look at it in isolation and just say we need more information around water. I think we need to get people to understand that we've got to get more efficient with our resources generally across this country.
Yeah, and I suppose just sticking to it from a water point of view, despite the terrible weather we sometimes have over here with lots of rain, there's actually a real risk of drought now, isn't there, Ollie, in the UK? So have you got anything else just to say about that?
Yeah, so I think if you ever get a chance to look this speech up, anyone that's interested, James Bevan from the Environment Agency did a talk back in 2019, which is kind of infamous in the industry now, which is his Jaws of Death talk. And effectively what he was talking about there is if you look at the supply-demand graph for the UK as a whole, so you've got supply going kind of down and demand going up, in about 25 years' time is when those lines start to cross. So our demand is going to outstrip our supply on water unless we do things. So, and the main driver for that is climate change, and it's the main risk. If you look at wholesale water companies' water management plans into the future, going 25 years, all of them will say climate change is their biggest risk. And then on top of that, you've got to layer population growth and economic growth. We're going to hopefully do more in this country. And I think what's happened speed and make that picture a bit more complex because it's not equal across the UK, that problem. The southeast has got a much bigger problem and has one now compared to say the north, is COVID and decentralising workspaces. We're actually also on top of that got a levelling up agenda and we're going to move people to different parts of the country. So I think probably for the first time now, before new operations are cited and people are doing stuff, there's going to be serious questions businesses, organisations have to ask and say, okay, well, what's the water resource position here? And that's something we have taken for granted. I think you're right, over generations we just haven't had to think about it. But I would say I don't think that's necessarily true, and my colleagues in energy might say it's the same thing, that people don't ask themselves before they're going to go and build something somewhere, will we be able to get enough power to it? Will we be able to get enough water? I think people build it and then afterwards start asking about where that's going to come from. And I think that has to change.
Yeah, no, completely agree on that point. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just try and pick a couple more questions that are relevant to the discussion. We've had one that asked, is there a minimum limit for the amount of solar export that would be purchased by a supplier, distribution network operator? Gareth, I think you'll be in the best position to answer that one.
Not really, because there are different contract structures that allow you to take advantage of that. So there's the supplier export guarantee tariff, which is for your smaller scale solar, and then clearly as it gets more significant, upwards over a megawatt, you start to look at PPAs, power purchase agreements. And they can become very bespoke, and we can, all suppliers can offer them, and we can work to tailor those to the specific customer's needs. So, whatever the level of output, there is a route to achieve the benefit. Best to talk locally with your supplier about the best route and the best tariff to seek. I would suggest if you're starting to get some volume together, then the PPA route, again, forming part of that net zero journey, is probably the piece to look at. But I do appreciate that across, I tend to get, my team tend to get queries from local schools, etc., who have got solar on the roof, and that's where, as an immediate answer, the export guarantee is probably the best route to take. Happy to pick anything up offline with that.
No, that's great. Well, we are coming to the end of the session. So what I would like to do is just ask each one of you just to kind of give a quick statement on how you think it's best for a local authority to kind of meet net zero, or anyone in the public sector. So we'll start with Vanessa. What do you think's key?
I guess going along with what I've mentioned in the webinar is, having a view of your whole energy data and being able to see, all your consumption from your power, your gas, your water, as well as your generation, and having your connected assets, whether that be solar, wind, being able to see a view of all of that is kind of step one in understanding what steps you need to take to lower your consumption and start to see those carbon savings and starting to make those internal decisions, whether that's, shutting off lights, that's bringing on that solar, or looking at those different PPAs. There's many different ways, and like I mentioned, it's not a one size fits all. So there are different steps, and especially for smaller councils, there are many different steps for them to take and to start looking at that. There's much, I can't put it all into one sentence, but I think it all starts with your data and having the best view of that. And yeah.
Over to you, Ben.
I'm in agreement with Vanessa, and just to kind of add to that, I reckon just from working with many public sector bodies over the years, that the main place to start is like behavioural change and education of the people that are within the organisation, or whatever the case may be. Educating people on how their actions impact things, such as leaving the heating on or not changing the timers on the boilers, whatever the case may be. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think it all starts with a behavioural change.
Gareth?
Yeah, well, let's be honest. The clock has probably started ticking for a lot of organisations that are listening in on this call today. So from my perspective, it's about picking the right partners. Lots of different projects that will need to be linked together. So strong project. Sort of cross-organisational management is really important, because if you don't work across the full function, it'll be very difficult to realise the benefit and drive towards that specific target.
Right, thanks, Gareth. And finally, Ollie.
Yeah, I guess, I'd say one, claim the whole benefit. So I think today, hopefully, the presentation been able to outline that there is a carbon reduction benefit from water. So make sure if you're doing that work that you're counting everything for your hard work. And the other one I'd say is, I guess, engage your supplier. So I think, certainly us as a supplier, we're happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with people on our ambition and help them and kind of publicly say, right, if you want to achieve this, then we want to help you do that. How we achieve that will look different from organisation to organisation, but I'd definitely say engage and kind of challenge your supplier to stand with you on those things.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I have overrun slightly, so apologies for that. But I'd just like to thank all the speakers. So thank you, Vanessa, Ben, Gareth and Ollie, for taking your time out, running through your presentations and being part of the live Q&A panel. I'd also like to thank iNetwork for kind of supporting the event. And I'd also like to pass my thanks on to all the contributions from the attendees. We haven't got round to answering all the questions, but we will get back to you on them and answer them questions in due course. So thanks again for all listening. So have a good day, take care, and hopefully we'll speak soon. Thank you.